welcome to the Stoa. I am Teresa Hart from the Liminal Space Agency, and I'm here to introduce Susan Campbell today, who is back at the Stoa to talk about compassionate self-inquiry. Susan is the grandmother of authentic relating, and her work has been a huge influential part of my life and those around me at the LSA. I'm currently reading her latest book, From Triggered to Tranquil, and the compassionate self-inquiry practice in here has been a very powerful influence on me. So this session, how it's going to work, it's 60 minutes, and we will have a Q&A portion. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll call on you. And this session is going on YouTube, so if you don't want to be seen, then just let me know and I'll read your question out. And I will pass it over to Susan. Welcome back to the Stoa.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everyone. So my aim today is to introduce you to a practice that I use with all my coaching clients. It's called compassionate self-inquiry, and it's designed to help you process emotional pain more efficiently. So anybody up for that? Wanting to be able to move through their emotions, but not deny them or ignore them. So I'm going to introduce that practice in a little bit, but first I want to say a few more things about just the whole practice that I call trigger work. So about a month or two ago, I did a presentation for the Stoa, and I talked about your trigger signature. What are the early warning signs that tell you that you're triggered? Was anybody at that? Could I see like a show of hands? Did anybody come to that one? So most of you, this will be your first introduction to me, at least on the Stoa. I'm going to do a screen share now just to give you the overview of the 5 steps of trigger work. And here you'll see that I'll try to scroll this up here. Accepting that we do have these automatic emotional reactions that we call trigger reactions, and I'll define that in a second. Knowing our trigger signature, that's what I worked with the group last time on. That was August 31st, I believe. And then once you notice you're triggered, having some kind of a pause practice where you actually, because you're able to notice the early warning signs of your trigger reaction after knowing your trigger signature, it's like your handwriting, like, do I blow up or shut down or freeze, that sort of thing. That's your trigger signature, knowing that you need to pause. And then once you have the ability to notice you're triggered, then the next step is the compassionate self-inquiry practice, which is an inner practice of being with the sensations and the emotions that have come up, being with those in a self-nurturing way. So that's what we'll be dealing with today. And then once you've gotten a more friendly and compassionate relationship to your own pain, you're ready to go back, and the last step is repair. Go back and patch things up if you've said some things that you wish you hadn't have said while you were triggered, that sort of thing. So we'll just be dealing with the compassionate self-inquiry step today, but actually that will help you accept that triggering is perfectly normal. And if we have any shame around the fact that we sometimes lose our full awareness, we just call it losing it sometimes. If we have any shame around that, this will help us resolve that shame. Self-love and self-compassion are a good antidote for shame. So I'm going to stop the share and define what a trigger reaction is. I think I need to do that first. So when somebody is triggered, they're Their attention is very narrowed, and they're in a survival part of their brain, the more primitive part of your brain, that doesn't let you see your full range of options anymore. Like somebody walks out while you're talking, and if you get triggered, you immediately think, well, I'm not important, or that person's insensitive, or something like that. And you don't realize that you have the option of saying, hey, where are you going? I wanted to spend a little more time with you, or something that's just friendly. You sort of lose the friendliness. You lose your sense that you still have some power in the situation. So when we're triggered, we don't see our options. And here's some of the things that tend to go on inside of us when we get triggered. I'm going to do the second screen share here. A trigger comes from a childhood need that was not adequately met. If some of your needs for feeling loved and valued, or feeling safe, feeling protected, feeling like you're important, like you're a priority, those are really important childhood needs. And when those needs aren't met, we sometimes just shut down around that feeling of pain when that's not being met. We just close off and don't allow that need to be felt much anymore. So we've kind of numbed or frozen a part of ourselves. So that kind of thing happens in childhood, and then we develop our personalities, and our personalities often have some little blind spots. So our triggers are responsible for our blind spots. Like we don't want to see certain things, or we see things when they're not even happening. And that's what this screen share is about. We tend to be vigilant in our adult lives. And maybe we're not like super vigilant, like always watching, but we tend to react in our adult lives to things that were painful in childhood, that were too painful. And we had to shut down around feeling the full pain of those. And so we grew up with certain defense mechanisms and certain triggers that have us overreact when one of these different fears seems to be happening again in our adult relationships, when it actually probably did happen. Something like this probably did happen in childhood to a less resourceful little human being. So when we're less resourceful, we don't have the self-support to nurture ourselves through some of these scary situations. So just look down this list now with me and notice if you have a tendency to be sensitive to being judged or criticized. So that would be one of the more common trigger signatures. Or do you feel a tendency sometimes to think you're being ignored, not included, left out? Or are you more vigilant about being controlled or disrespected, or not a priority, not important? Just kind of scan your whole life. Some of this you'll recognize relates to childhood experiences. Others, you probably don't have memories of childhood, but you know that these are sensitive areas for you. Some people have a fear of being blamed or being seen as bad or wrong. So sometimes a person who's got that trigger signature doesn't get triggered until somebody else is upset with you. So some of us think, well, I probably wouldn't get triggered much if I didn't have this other person in my life who gets upset with me. So just check in if that's you. Others of us feel I'm a disappointment, not good enough, or my boundaries aren't being respected. These are the most common fear stories that I hear in my private practice. I'm all alone, abandoned, or maybe like it's all on my shoulders. There's no one to depend on. Or maybe I'm not being seen or heard, or there's no space for me, no room for my needs. Or I'm not valued, I'm not wanted, I'm being rejected. And then this last one that I wrote here, I'm being trapped, smothered, or invaded. That's not as common for humans, but some of us have that. So just knowing that different humans are kind of walking around scanning for different kinds of things can help us understand that we're not all wired up the same, that sometimes we're wired up to filter reality through this lens. And these are all fears. It's not like you're really not good enough. It's that you fear you're not good enough. But when a trigger happens where somebody criticizes something you've said or somebody ignores something you've said, sometimes you will go into not good enough. Or I guess the main thing that triggers that is you disappointed somebody that's very important to you. So these are the very human things. I'm going to stop this screen share. These are the very human things that each of us carry. Some of us carry one of those things, some of us carry a couple of them. But it's really good to know if that's the filter that I'm looking through, if that is what I'm scanning for. And we might not want to see ourselves as always scanning for danger in our lives or in interpersonal disconnection. But there's a part of us, from almost all of us, didn't get every childhood need met. And when I talk about childhood needs, I'm talking about the core attachment needs that every child has in order to grow up feeling like a secure human being, to see the universe as friendly versus unfriendly, versus how's the universe disposed toward me? Is the universe happy with me? Do I get what I want in the world, or am I frequently frustrated? Do I feel left out? Do I feel one down? So our early childhood experiences condition us in certain ways. And I think most of us who come on programs like this at the Stoa, we're about the business of freeing ourselves from this conditioning. We don't have to be slaves to this conditioning once we begin to work consciously with it. So that's really what trigger work is. It's to know what's behind there motivating you, that may be hard to see at first until you open up to the idea that, yeah, all my needs weren't met. Sometimes people think, well, if I think about what my needs weren't met, I'm blaming my parents. That's not what this is about. We're not blaming anybody. We're just coming to terms with what really happened in your childhood. That's what we're trying to do in doing this compassionate self-inquiry, because the inquiry, and I'll be guiding you through that process in a bit here, the inquiry is about allowing memories to come back if they're there. We won't all have memories of childhood. Some of us just have a general feeling, a sensation, sort of a dread coming all over your whole body, or an anxiety, or an I'm not safe, something like that. So sometimes doing this work doesn't lead to memories, and it's not necessary that you come up with any memories when you're doing this practice. So I want to start this practice now, this compassionate self-inquiry practice, And it's going to start by having us get relaxed and resourced, just feeling yourself on the chair that you're sitting on, noticing your breathing, just allowing your breathing to open up. And close your eyes if that feels good, because we're going to be looking inside and we're going to be remembering a recent, or not necessarily really recent, but an adult event where one of those fears that I just listed got triggered. But maybe it didn't feel like a fear. Maybe it felt like anger or upset or disappointment in somebody else. So we're going to be bringing up an interpersonal situation where you got triggered. But just in preparation for that, I'm asking you to just relax, probably close your eyes, and just begin to feel the body sensations. And allow your breathing to become more open. Just making space for whatever arises here. Notice if there's any tension anywhere in your body. See if you can just breathe into that so that you feel like an open space where things can come into your awareness. You're making a big open witnessing space here. And now I'm going to ask you to open up to a memory, something that happened in an adult relationship, maybe not real intense, but something that you think you can be with for a little while here. So take your time, scan your memory, while continuing to hold an open space with your breath. So we're just allowing a memory to come. Continue to breathe deeply as you now recall the location and who was with you. So we're talking about an interpersonal situation here. Recall what was said or done or not said. Maybe you were hoping for something that you didn't get. Maybe there was a look on the person's face or a tone of voice that added to the triggering reaction. And now bring in what it felt like for you. What did you feel in the situation? And continue to breathe and keep that witness activated. And we're going to be curious and tender toward the feelings that arise now. So bring in a memory of what it felt like, what your body sensations were, and any reaction you had that was overt. Maybe there wasn't an obvious reaction. Maybe it was all internal. So just allow this picture to unfold. It's like you're watching a movie of an event. So it's very helpful to just keep a compassionate witness activated. And that's helped by slow, conscious breathing. Because as you breathe, it's almost as if you open up more space inside yourself to allow things to happen and to allow yourself to take a wider angle view on things. So you're kind of stepping back from the situation. Now, the person that you're seeing there is you, and of course, the other person involved. But tune in to you in this kind of movie that you're watching and feel, do you have some sense, even now, of empathy or tenderness? See if you can hold this hurting part of you or this upset part, or maybe it's a scared part that's kind of shut down. Think of this right now as a part of you that's coming back for some attention. The triggering mechanism allowed this possibly frozen or unintegrated part of you to come back and begin to be noticed, but in a way where it's welcomed and accepted. So we're imagining that whatever that person, that you in this movie, whatever this person's feeling, you're feeling empathy for that. You can understand why the person felt this, why you felt this. And see if there's any other thoughts or associations that come in now. You're in the scene that's fairly recent, but maybe some other thoughts or associations will come in. Maybe it reminds you of something else. Maybe what's happening, you almost think, this is kind of the story of my life. But just notice any other thoughts, maybe thoughts that this shouldn't have happened or what the other person should have done or said. Just let it all in, all the different aspects of this reaction you were having. And all the while, you're kind of now beginning to feel some of the upset or pain that you felt at the time. So when you're feeling empathy, you're also feeling the pain or the distress of the person that got triggered. But if things get at all intense, just open your eyes and look around so that you can give yourself a break. Maybe pick an object in the room to really look at and describe to yourself. That always works to bring yourself out of an intense situation, is to become more grounded in just your present sensations. But otherwise, just keep exploring. What was that like? And maybe some memories from an earlier time in your life will come up. And if they do, this is a gift for further healing. What we're really doing here is we're helping to heal the fear of emotional pain by voluntarily embracing some of the pain that you felt. We're not in any way thinking the painful thing shouldn't have happened. There might be a part of you that's feeling that and saying that to yourself. And if there's that part, embrace that part with your loving attention. So it's time to see if anything comes from the past, any memories. And if a memory of your childhood comes up, then see if you can feel empathy for that younger you. What age were you? It sometimes helps to do this work if you can actually remember an incident or an age. And feel what that child was feeling. And imagine that child as someone you love very much. And just embrace that child with your caring right now. Letting the child know that you're here with it. And continue to breathe and resource yourself by feeling your seat on the chair you're sitting on. You're just now holding space. And maybe you even want to say something to this child. But let your words be simple, like I'm here with you. I see you, that sort of thing, if you do feel an impulse to speak. So let's take an image now of the big you holding space for a part of you that's been pushed away in some way, maybe a part of you because it creates emotional pain that you don't like to look at too often. You don't want to own, but you're owning this. You're owning that this pain really happened. And you can be there with yourself in this, like a good mother would hold a much loved child. So we're just being with whatever the sensations of pain or upset were, whatever the unmet need was, while at the same time holding a bigger space. I'm here with you. And when you're ready, we're going to take a few more slow, deep breaths. Give ourselves time to say goodbye to this image, to come back to feeling our body sensations here, the present moment in this room. And give yourself a little appreciation for going through that exercise. Just take some time before you want to come out and open your eyes again. But when you do open your eyes, stretch and move your body a little bit so you can feel like you're back. Do whatever you need to do to come back to this social space. So this exercise is designed to be done over and over and over. You don't necessarily do it right in the moment that you're triggered, because very often when you're in the middle of being triggered, you don't even know you were triggered. So sometimes like a day later or a few hours later, once you're a little bit calmer, I recommend that you practice this with a triggering incident, and it'll take you to a certain place like it did today. This took you to a certain place. A different time when you're triggered and you do the same exercise, it might take you to some new place. And I wind up doing this with my clients over and over and over on different triggering events. And it's amazing how each time we do the exercise, we discover new aspects of parts of the self that we hadn't really come to terms with. There always seems to be more in the psyche that's down there kind of motivating us. So this is like a practice that it almost like never gets old. There's always something new there. Now, I wanted to see about if someone's willing to share what came up for you, what happened, what you went through. Is there anybody who'd be willing to let us know how that was for you? Or if it didn't work for you, we can hear that too. I'd really like to hear that, because there's different things you can do when this practice doesn't work for you. So anybody willing to share? Just like raise your hand. Scott's got his hand raised. Hi, Scott.
Hi there, Susan. Hi, everyone.
What happened for you?
So I think I picked a triggering incident where some loved ones kind of intervened or told me how they felt about how I was progressing in a particular area of my life, and how they felt like I was sort of not progressing. And at the time I thought, I did a pretty good job of managing my emotions in the moment, because I felt quite triggered is a good word for it. And as I was reflecting or kind of putting myself back in that place, I had really strong kind of physical feelings of a lot of heat in my body. I felt very sort of caught, trapped. I felt, and as I sort of, that quickly kind of felt like it connected to feelings of when I was younger, of sort of not being good enough or not measuring up, and always kind of feeling like I was trying to prove myself and trying to make sure that if anyone was watching at any time, they would see me, excelling in every domain. And it felt very tiring to have that feeling again. And and that then took me off on a whole bunch of other stuff, where I sort of felt like where that came from was not really having a space where my emotions were allowed or accepted. And I had quite a lot of empathy for my parents. They were both in different situations, but both had difficulty navigating their own emotions. And I'm quite an emotional person. I think I was as a child too, but I had no place for my emotions. And so I think the feeling caught or sort of judged comes from not being able to explore, like not being able to make sense of my own emotions and having no place to make sense of them, and therefore basically deciding that they had very little to offer me, and instead busying myself with being very good at everything as a way to kind of not turn inwards and ignore all these feelings that had place and had no space. And yeah, I felt really, what I said to myself was that I'm sorry you felt unheld,
Mhm.
and I'm sorry you didn't have the spaces you needed, and that your emotions, weren't welcome. And that felt really nice to say. It just felt really tender. Yeah, and I feel like I'd like to go back there at some point and continue that conversation. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you so much, Scott. That's so beautiful. That's such a good description of how emotions are generally not held. When we're children, our parents are busy or distracted, and most of us, and maybe worse than busy and distracted, maybe they just are totally wrapped up in their own lives and don't really have time for us. But what that leaves the child feeling often, first, like no resources, nowhere to go with my emotions. But even more serious than that is when I feel emotional pain, there's something bad or wrong with me, so I need to hide it. Now, Scott didn't say exactly that, but just not having one's emotions held can kind of like, well, nowhere to go with my emotions then. That's more like what happened with Scott. But for many of us, it's beyond that. It's my emotions need to be hidden. And in some sense, anything that's painful for a child that a child doesn't learn how to process with adult help, depending on your age, but we need someone to co-regulate us, to hold us when we're hurting. And how many of us really got that sufficiently? But when we have somebody that holds us when we're hurting, that lets us cry ourselves out, we learn that we can take emotional pain in stride. We can even take that, let's say we disappoint our parents, and we can take that I'm not enough, that fear that I'm not enough. We can feel that momentarily. And when our parents comfort us and reassure us that that fear is not true, we learn how to do that for ourselves. But most of us are on our own, like Scott talked about. So we have to reparent ourselves now. And we can do that. And in reparenting ourselves, we're teaching ourselves that emotional pain is not something to be avoided. Like Scott said, he's curious to go back there again, spend a little more time back there. Because if we become more familiar with that territory, then when we get triggered, we go, oh, I know this place. I'm familiar with this place. I can bring some comfort to myself and quickly calm myself. And that's called self-regulation, being able to nurture and calm yourself when you're triggered. And it's one of the most important life skills we can have. And so self-regulation doesn't just mean calming your nervous system. It also means doing this inner inquiry to help heal those fear stories, because all of those fears, like I'm not enough or I'm a disappointment, all of that stuff, all those fear stories are not true, but our adult activating situations where we're criticized or controlled or ignored in our adult life, it brings it all back. And momentarily, we're feeling like we're not enough or we're not loved, something like that. Any other comments about that exercise? And I think there were some things in the chat too. So Teresa, do you see anything in the chat that is something I should be commenting on?
We have some questions for Q&A in the chat. They're related to the exercise, so we could.
Yeah, let's have one of those. Can you read one, or
yes, Lorraine, would you like to ask your question? I can read it out.
Go ahead and read it, Teresa.
Lorraine says, what would help to connect the adult trigger to the child trigger? I've had trouble to see an image of myself as a child or a situation when I was a child.
I would say, don't try too hard. If we do this practice, eventually what is ready, let's say what is ready to come up will come up. Nature has its own kind of healing timetable, but this process is like activating your own inner healing. So you may not have memories at all. I mean, some of us just don't have childhood memories, but if we can kind of open up to a general feeling tone of the present situation and just kind of stay with that, and then sense into associations. Maybe you're middle-aged now, but you'll have a memory of something that happened in your 20s, let's say. And that's a memory that's useful. Just go that far back. But having specific memories is not at all essential to your healing. Sometimes it's even more useful for some of us just to stay on the level of sensation. Like, okay, now there's a knot in my throat. Oh, and now that's starting to be a pain in my chest. And sometimes you just move from one sensation to another, and then a thought will come up, or like a bigger, more overwhelming feeling, like this overall feeling of dread, or I'm not safe or something. And just keep doing the practice of breathing, holding space, seeing what's ready to come up. And if you do it enough times, maybe there will be childhood memories that are, I'm going to say, meant to come up. I can't say how this all happens, but I know that it's not necessary to have memories. I just want to reassure people about that. But you can have intuitions. You can go, well, given who I think my parents were when I was 6, I have a pretty good intuition of what that little girl felt like. Okay. And play around with that too. Intuitions can be useful. Okay, thanks for the question. Any other questions?
Edward, you had a question. Would you like to read it out?
Yes. Hi, Susan. Thank you. I wanted to ask about a best practice for handling multiple trigger signatures. I'm often, when I do get triggered, or even notice that I'm triggered, I have multiple signatures, is what you referred to them as. Is there a, do you have a suggestion about
whatever comes up foreground?
Okay.
Like when you say multiple, maybe as you start to go quiet and notice what comes across the screen of your awareness, maybe you will have like, oh, there's that, and then there's that, and then there's that. You know, we call that multiple foregrounds. You know?
Okay.
Is that something you're talking about now, or
Yeah, kind of. It's like in you know, and so yeah, so what occurs to me is it's so what I do now is I just kind of, you know, I try to retreat from the situation, like do the pause, but when I'm feeling that, the practice that I use is more like a Vipassana. It's like come and let it go. And I wonder if it's, you know, if maybe exploring the one that's most prominent, you know,
Yeah.
without getting attached to it or anything, you know.
That's a good, I mean, that's a good answer to your question there. Just whatever, eventually, one thing usually becomes more foreground. But if you have multiple foregrounds, that's an experience often of like confusion. And maybe that has something to do with some early experience that triggered you, as being overwhelmed or confused or too much data coming in. You know, I'm just riffing now for you.
Oh yeah, no, it's true.
Sometimes
Sometimes it's, yeah, sometimes it's very much, you know, I can tie an event to it, and sometimes it's just trauma from stress over time.
Mhm.
And, and so, and those are harder to deal with because, they not, something doesn't come up. There's not something prominent that I can identify with or see as a explore somatically. So, yeah.
Well, I think just stay with, I'm breathing, I'm remembering the adult situation. I'm going back to what did that adult situation feel like, that recent triggering event. And then just continue to see what comes. Maybe there will be, I mean, in a way, you can only experience one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean,
Yeah.
because and for you, first, the one thing is many things, but that's
Right.
your current experience, and then
Right.
your current experience will always keep shifting and flowing. When you hold this kind of open space and continue to intend to be a safe, nurturing presence for whatever arises. So you bring a little bit of intentionality to the moment here. Things will come and there's no right answer. That's what I want everybody to get. And it'll go in a different direction each time. So I'd say just keep doing the practice and be open.
Thank you.
Mhm. There were quite a few other questions here. Want to pick one for me, Teresa?
Yes, Jay, would you like to read your question out?
Sure. So earlier you talked about maybe different habitual responses to a triggering situation, such as blowing up in anger or withdrawing. My own habit is definitely to go silent and withdraw. And during the exercise that you led us through, the situation that was immediately called to mind was only a couple weeks ago. And when the triggering event happened, I totally shut down and didn't say anything and withdrew. And that ended up making things go from bad to worse, even though at the same time I acknowledge that if I hadn't have gone silent and withdrawn, I probably would have said or done something very untoward. And that also could have made the situation even worse. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to discern when to stay in the triggering situation, and when to disengage, specifically for someone like me whose habitual reaction is to, do this.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm reading into something you said, Jay, and I'm wanting to ask, do you have a value on kind of like, even though you're not able to do it when you're triggered, do you have a value on like staying engaged when you're triggered? Like I should be able to stay engaged and see this through. Do you have some kind of a should inside your mind like that?
I think so, yes. And I think it has something to do with wanting to be courageous. So yeah, basically, yes.
Okay, so to all of you who shut down and withdraw, like Jay, all you can do to be resourceful in a triggering situation is to consciously give yourself a moment. If it's a pretty big trigger, you might have to just like say, I need to pause. I need to collect myself before I can come back and respond. Once you do this work enough, you're at least able to say that. If you're not too triggered, you can say, I need a moment here, but you absolutely need to slow things down or to give yourself some kind of a pause. And it's usually more than a quick pause at first. Later on, you can learn to calm yourself more quickly once you've done this practice more. And you can just say, I need a moment. Okay, I'm back. But I want to say to to those of us who back off. In a way, you're better off backing off, because to do anything in the midst of a trigger situation, to say anything, it's going to not be your most authentic truth. It's going to be some kind of acting over the top of what's really going on inside of you, and it will not work, basically. So just take your shutdown, just take your shutdown as the beginning of your pause, and this could, but if you're shutting down, you're not consciously pausing. So what I really want to tell people is that the first sign of triggering, the first sign that you start to feel like I'm not safe, or I'm being attacked, or that person is judging me, better to have some kind of a pause practice. Now, in intimate relationships, I recommend couples have a pause agreement. But even in groups, and I do growth groups, so they're not like business meetings, but I think it could be done in business meetings also, where the facilitator at the beginning of the session says, if you get triggered, or if anybody in the room gets triggered, we're going to say the word pause, so that we can all calm our nervous systems before getting back into it. Or if two people get into it in the middle of a meeting, I, the facilitator, I'm going to say the word pause, because if one person in the interaction is triggered, the rest of us are going to feel it on some level. And that's in certain types of groups, because we're kind of connected, these groups where you really can feel if something's off in the room. So I just usually, as the facilitator, will name that triggering can happen. It's pretty common. And the best thing to do is to pause, not to try to stay engaged. Thanks for your question, Jay. Who else has a question?
We're through all of the questions in the chat right now. I've been sitting with a sense of the reparenting that you were talking about, and this acceptance of the emotional space, and how much it feels like the child part of me often says, no, don't go there. And I've been hearing you kind of talking about flowing with what is there and working with it. And so I'm curious if you could speak any more to that shifting into the witnessing space that you're talking about.
Yeah. So if you're able to see the child parts saying, no, don't go there, then you've got your witness activated. But if you lose the witness and you get completely, let's say you're in the process here, and you just get completely into identifying with the child and feeling the child's pain, that can work okay too sometimes. Sometimes you will lose the witnessing space for a bit during this, because you just need to cry, or you just need to feel that a little bit more. You need to be a little closer to the event. As we do this practice more, we learn to trust ourselves, to guide ourselves in this. At first, things can get out of hand sometimes, because you just haven't practiced with this. And when I say get out of hand, you can go back into an old trauma and start to shake and that sort of thing. But even that isn't horrible. It can be a part of your healing, shaking and crying and making sounds, or just saying a word, no, over and over, just being kind of fully in it. That can seem like it's getting out of hand, but you'll learn how to pull yourself out of that. There's not like a quick answer to go in and out of having a little more space, but I do recommend that how, that if you start to feel like just overwhelmed with activation while you're doing this activity, you open your eyes and look around and stand up and move your body and just come out of it. But you don't have to do that. I mean, it's just sort of, you're going to feel into what is the right movement for you once you're more familiar with the space of just following feelings wherever they lead you. What we're hoping for is that you trust your own natural healing process. Now, there is a little technique for activating the witness, and that's like putting this, if you're able to do this, which is putting it on like a movie screen, as if you're watching a movie. So that, you know, if you can try that and play around with that, okay, now I'm in it. Now I'm watching myself, that same little kid hurting all alone. I'm watching her on a movie screen, just alternating back and forth. Sometimes that can train you to go in and out of the witness. Because it actually, I'm glad you asked that question, Teresa, because it really is often a good thing to allow yourself to just go into the feelings more fully, as long as you trust that you're safe in that. And this practice teaches you how to feel safe with difficult emotions.
Yeah, I'm really loving that focus on trusting the process.
Yeah.
You're now at the top of the hour, so we'll close out. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Susan, before we?
Well, I want to let people know that the new book, the new book, From Triggered to Tranquil, is what describes this process and many other processes for working with your triggers. And I do a free monthly group coaching call on Zoom the first Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And to get the link for that, you need to subscribe to my newsletter. So you go to susancampbell.com and just scroll down below the picture on the homepage, and it says subscribe to Susan's newsletter. And I only send out one newsletter a month. It's not like I have a whole lot of things I'm selling these days. So if you want to buy something from me, just buy the book. But I do love working with groups. And so I just offer this free coaching call once a month, and hope to see some of you on that call. Thank you for your good attention today. Bye.